Welcome to Our Interesting Times with host Timothy Kelly, who interviews today's top alternative and revisionist thinkers.
May you live in interesting times.
Recently, I had the honor of being a guest on Dean Arnold's Global Storyline podcast. It was a pretty good talk we had, and I thought I'd post it and allow my listeners to listen to it in its entirety. Thank you.
This is Global Storyline with your host Dean W. Arnold, where we examine events current and past and place them in the global storyline.
Our guest tonight on Global Storyline is Timothy Kelly, founder of the interview podcast Our Interesting Times. Tim has conducted approximately 100 interviews with some of the world's top alternative and revisionist thinkers. He's the father of 6 at an undisclosed location on the East Coast, and it's a real privilege to be able to interview him today, learn more about him, and have him help us shape some global storylines and also take an inventory of the alternative media. Tim, thanks for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Man, it's great to have you here. How many times have you been on the other side of the microphone like this where you're getting interviewed instead of asking the questions?
Twice.
Twice? All right. I like
Twice.
that. That's what I was hoping to hear. Yeah. So,
this will be the third time.
All right. We'll try to keep you as uncomfortable as we possibly can. Okay. So I'm a big fan.
Thank you.
Was I right about 100 interviews? Is that about correct?
Yeah, it's about 100 interviews because a couple of those videos I posted are people interviewing me. So, yeah, I've conducted about 100 interviews.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, too, when I looked at the site. I've listened to every interview. It's my first go-to when I'm looking for podcasts. I always check and say, has Tim got one up yet? Because you usually do it a couple of weeks maybe. And I gave a little formal interview saying, top alternative and revisionist thinkers that you interview, but why don't you, in your words, tell us what it is that you think you do and what you're doing out there and what you're providing to the world of cyberspace?
Well, the focus or purpose of my podcast is to kind of synthesize or aggregate other people's research. I don't project myself as a researcher myself. I simply don't have the time for that. I have an honest job.
Right. So you're more of a generalist, and you're not necessarily an expert in any particular subject.
Yeah, no expert really in any particular subject. But I've over the years I've always kept up reading and my done research and or not.
But tell us a little bit about like what area of the world you're dealing with. There's a lot of people listening here who don't know who you are and they don't know anything about your podcast. So tell us the kind of people you deal with and what kind of message you're trying to get out there.
Okay. Well, the name of the podcast is Our Interesting Times. That's of course, that's a Chinese curse that's been passed down. I don't know if that's.
May you live in interesting times.
Yes, yeah, may you live in interesting times. And of course, when things are usually interesting, it's usually because there's something bad happening. That's always makes for the most interesting history. We all kind of yearn for the quiet life, so we don't want things to be that interesting. be careful what you wish for. You may get it, right?
Right.
So the idea is to focus on, well, contemporary issues and also historical issues. Like kind of revisionist history, questioning the official narratives we've been spoon-fed throughout the years. If you look into these issues, you realize just below the surface, you realize much of what we've been told simply isn't true, or it's half true, which is as much as a lie as a whole lie. So it's to promote these alternative views, which I think have sound basis in historical research and evidence.
All right, let's cut to the chase for the people who need to hear it. Some people would call it conspiracy theory. But really what we're talking about is things like questioning the official explanation for the JFK assassination, looking at other world events and looking at it from a different perspective. So one of the words to use for that is revisionist history. What other kind of large areas are you questioning?
Oh, much of our understanding of big events, whether the First World War, particularly the Second World War, that was the big one, and I think that occasioned the biggest lies. Much of the Cold War, what we've understood, these things all, of course, develop out of one another. And based on my research and others and the reading I've done, it seems to be that this seems to be roughly a plan that's been unfolded throughout the 20th century. Much of what we experienced in the 1960s isn't what we've been told it was. It wasn't this spontaneous, or organic development rising out of sort of this linear culture societal development. Whether it's the counterculture, the rise of the drug culture, the Cold War itself. This seems to be part of a strategy of tension or an attempt to sort of manufacture or manipulate culture for the benefit of the powers that be.
Okay, well let's make it specific. Let's pick one of those things you just mentioned.
Okay.
World War II. What is the other way of looking at World War II different than what we see on the History Channel?
The Hitler Channel, yeah.
Yeah, the Hitler Channel.
Well, like many Americans, most Americans think World War II began December 7th, 1941 with the sneak attack on Pearl Harbor by those dastardly Japanese who were just so evil. They wanted to take over the world, or at least half the United States, and split the difference with Germany, and Italy, of course. Of course, any understanding of history, of the politics of the day, or even geography knew that narrative is absurd. And the World War II itself, I'm not going to say this chronologically developed out of World War One, but it developed out of the geopolitical wranglings of the British Empire versus Germany. This was roughly the England's strategy of weakening the continental powers in order to maintain its dominance, her imperial dominance. And this strategy dates as far back. I think it was articulated as far back as 1900 with Halford Mackinder.
Right.
So World War I, World War II was more of an English plot to kind of, I believe, kind of to drag or to trick Germany into war, so she could both weaken Germany and Russia and maintain her dominance. And this is spelled out in this strategy is spelled out in the Mackinder Doctrine. So it's not conspiracy theory. This was the plan. And it's and just coincidentally, it unfolded in grim reality throughout the 20th century.
So that would be as opposed to the official view that World War II was a response to a guy named Hitler who came out of nowhere and wanted to take over the planet.
Yeah, he was a spawn of hell or something. Mm-hmm. Hitler, he was Satan's child or something. He just came out of nowhere and wanted to take over the world. But obviously, the situation, World War II was a very complicated event. I think it spanned roughly 6 years. It was waged on 5 of the 7 continents, and I think it killed an average of like 18,000 people a day. It was a very complex event, and it's a bit more complicated than the propaganda we've been fed. Much of the understanding of that event is still seen through the lens of World War II propaganda.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there because I think we've covered that. So I just wanted to give people a taste of some of the specific stuff you do and the broad stuff you do, and that's all very good.
And then let me just add: this isn't to say that this is an excuse or justification for Nazi Germany's wartime, war itself. Obviously, it was guilty of immense atrocities. as all combatants wore. I'm just saying. I'm just trying to even the deck here.
I hear you, and that's good. But it's also a lot of your interviews aren't faraway history. I mean, you do podcasts on recent mass shootings and looking at behind the headlines on those. And other more recent events. So you're basically looking at the story behind the story, and you're looking at what the mainstream or the official storyline is not telling us, and you're talking to various experts and getting them to kind of enlighten us on what may really be happening in both recent and past events. So I wanted to kind of establish that. So. Let me ask you this question. When I introduced you, I used the word alternative media and I used the word revisionist. What else would you call this movement of people that has gotten more traction with the internet? What other words are out there to describe it? Is there such a thing? Is there a movement? I know some people don't like to really call it such a movement, but go ahead.
Well, I don't know if there's a definable movement or a tangible movement out there. You might have seen one forming about maybe 5-6 years ago, perhaps, maybe. But I think it was sidetracked by, I think purposely by cognitive infiltration. But any movement that's challenging the status quo is going to be infiltrated and manipulated. That's just a reality. I think that's the history. If you go into COINTELPRO and even before that. That's what the powers that be will do. They're not going to sit quietly by and say, "Oh well, let's let the opposition mobilize and develop." They're going to manipulate it and control opposition.
It sounded like you were hearkening to 9/11 Truth Movement and how it got infiltrated. So truthers is another word you'll hear out there. You'll hear conspiracy theory is a movement. You'll hear the word alternative media. Anything else that comes to mind?
Those
are pretty good ones, and I think what you're saying is that it's been going. This kind of thing has been going on for a long time, and arguably since the beginning of mankind. I mean, I think an argument could be made pretty plausibly that the world generally is under a cloud of lies, and those who really want to push through might be able to get through a great bit of the cobwebs, maybe not all of them, but it's probably the rule, not the exception, that the world generally has a bunch of fog that's not really telling you what's going on.
Yeah, well, it's the Plato's cave, the shadows on the wall,
right?
The allegory of the cave, and that applies. It applied way back then in ancient Greece and applies today. I think inevitably we're ruled by oligarchs. That seems to be the system of government, which is always, if it's not overt, it's just below the surface running things. Whether you have a democracy, a republic, or a dictatorship. So they're going to those with the means and the technology to shape or mold reality are going to do it, and I think that's what we've seen in many respects. I think technology makes a big difference, and so the use of technology, to control society, that's largely done through media. I think it's really come on in the latter half of the 20th century, particularly with motion pictures. That was a big thing. Music, electronically broadcast music, mass production, mass media. Mass media is a big thing. That's one thing I've looked into a few of my interviews, just the development of mass media and how, again, this thing wasn't organic or wasn't the free market from the get-go. It was controlled by folks like the Rockefellers.
Yeah, the three networks came out of the CIA, which was called the OSS at that point in time. Well, you know what? I was gonna kind of start getting into talking about the alternative media and the different ones, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But you so naturally flow into my other topic that I want to talk about, which is global storylines, which is the name of my website and my podcast. And I just want to kind of go into it because that's kind of where you go naturally, which I think is kind of interesting. But Let me just kind of ask you some open-ended questions. I'm going to take notes. Of course, I've got it recorded, so this is sort of to help me and for the audience to have fun and listen as we do it. But you've already kind of hearkened unto it. But if you were going to take the last 100 years of history, American history, and let's kind of focus on maybe geopolitics. But how would you sum up the storyline, if you will, if you had to make it a news headline? What's been going on for the last 100 years?
I think what we've seen roughly in the last 100 years is the gradual but inexorable reincorporation of the United States into the Anglo Empire. And now what we have today is the Anglo-American Empire. This was largely conducted through a few men. This is the Cecil Rhodes crowd, the Rhodes Trust, Milner's Kindergarten. These guys Cecil Rhodes, when he died, set up this trust in his will. His goal was to create a global empire of the English-speaking peoples, and he wanted to reincorporate the United States into this empire. And it was facilitated because although America fought a war of independence against the British Empire, there was always an elite or Eastern establishment which was Anglophile.
Now, don't you think they sort of accomplished that in the, what do you think, 50s and 60s, or do you think that's still going on?
The reincorporation?
Yes.
I think fine. It was. One thing is the British Empire which is being used. It was a shell, like a shell corporation, being used by this elite. I think
another word for this is Atlanticist. Is that right?
Yeah, that's a good term. Atlanticist powers, because this also factors into Israel, the formation of Israel, and you have the Jewish faction, you have the Anglo-American, and you have the Jewish faction too, the Zionist, and this whether or not
the Saker calls it the Anglo-Zionist Empire.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And it's hard to figure out who's a junior partner, who's a senior partner in this.
Right.
I'm still trying to figure that out.
Now, does this have anything to do with the people who talk about like laws and contracts and passports and birth certificates being written in all caps, and there's gold fringe on the American flag in the courtroom and that kind of stuff? Is that tied into this?
I think it factors into that.
Somewhere around the Civil War, America went from being a nation to an incorporation or something.
It became an incorporation. You had the creation of corporate personhood by the Santa Clara decision by a justice. It was almost like it was like a side commentary by a judge in the Santa Clara decision, creating corporate personhood, and the idea of the birth certificate, which most people think is just a matter of public records and that sort of thing, but really it is. The birth certificate really is a security that's traded because it's a claim. It more or less it's collateral for the U.S. debt, which individuals do hold, whether it's central banks or.
Are you required to do a birth certificate?
Yes, you are.
Okay, I'm going to tell you.
If you're to conduct yourself in any way, shape, and is there an explicit law that I can't say for sure?
Well,
but
I'm going to sidetrack real quick and tell a brief story. You'll like it, but the reason I asked that question is my son was born at home. He's 19 now, mm-hmm. and we got a birth certificate. I guess we had to, but we just did. But I didn't really question that. But we didn't get him a Social Security number. And one thing led to another. When he was about 14, for tax purposes and all that kind of stuff, I went ahead and made a phone call. I didn't want to because I knew he was off the grid, but we made a phone call to give him a Social Security number. And so I called, and I got some Yankee lady. She says, "I'm sure he's got a Social Security number." And I said, "No, ma'am, he doesn't." She says, "Well, where does he go to school?" And I said, "Well, he's homeschooled." She said, "Oh, okay. Well, the hospital had to give him one. Where was he born?" And I said, "He was born at home." She goes, "Oh, damn." So it kind of freaked her out. But anyway, so he was off the grid for a while. But if I knew that he didn't have to get a birth certificate back then, I probably would have done that too. But I guess he did. So you can't slither out of that. You can still slither out of getting a Social Security number, but I guess that one you still have to do.
Yeah, now that at birth they expect you to apply for that and get the card and all that.
I took us off track, so I want to get back to that. So I brought that up just to see. So does that concept have anything to do with what you're saying? The last 100 years or so, the big movement has been the rise of the Atlanticist powers, of the Anglo-Zionist kind of empire that's somewhat been the hegemony for running the world. Are those two things tied together at all?
Well, I think to the extent that directly, can't say for sure, but I do think it factors into the overall control system that's necessary to maintain the empire and to expand it. That's one thing. Is it's again, the birth certificate is collateral against the national debt. And literally, the human being is being farmed for his energy. And like I said, I do think there's probably people who know how to do actuarials and know what the life expectancy is and how long the person will probably live or be allowed to live to get the maximum amount of wealth out of them. And I do think that systems like whether it's the prison industrial complex or the medical complex have been set up as a business model, if you don't want to call it a conspiracy, to this also factors into the corporate production of food and with the processed food and all this stuff, how the downstream profits of a adulterated or tainted food system redounds to the benefit of the medical industrial complex, the same way that the drug laws redound to the benefit of the prison industrial complex, also contributes to society that can be manipulated and governed more efficiently by from the standpoint of the elite. And if you doubt that, just people like Dr. Jolly and Louis Jolly and West, who was quoted in the 70s in his book, he was part of MK Ultra. That the drug laws, the drug war itself, can be used not only to inject drugs into society, to opiate the masses, but also to use them as a weapon to target certain minorities, and it can also be used to maintain a certain occupancy level in the prison industrial complex that is increasingly becoming a profitable industry.
This is the same doctor that was hanging out with Timothy McVeigh and Sirhan and a few other assassins, right?
And Jack Ruby.
All right, Jack Ruby, right. Okay, well, let's do the same thing with 500 years. So we kind of talked about what's been the storyline for the last 100 years. If you're going to look at the last 500 years, how would you give that a news headline?
500 years. It takes what year? 16.
Back into the 1600s.
1600. Well, that's what the latter half of the Renaissance.
Yeah,
Enlightenment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
After 500 years, Satan still rules the world. I don't know, because the Enlightenment, humanism, all that stuff. Of course, that's been given. The way I was taught in public school was the Enlightenment was a great thing, right? Because it was human freedom and human being was now praised. He wasn't the sinful creature that at the Dark Ages or Christendom taught that it was that humanity was. Humanity would be celebrated for itself, and you had this explosion of arts and literature and these things, and this was the birth of freedom, in Western civilization. That's a very selective, very superficial interpretation of the Enlightenment. Because I think what happened with the Enlightenment was you also had development of a humanist philosophy, which is ultimately self-contradictory, and really ends in what? Nothing. Because there's nothing above man. There's nothing above man. Then there's nothing. There's no. I guess logos or the universe doesn't have a certain. There's not teleological purpose to the universe.
No absolutes. No natural law. No. One of the phrases you use a lot that I think, if you got to sum up 500 years in a phrase, is the overthrow of throne and altar.
Yeah, that's the dialectic. I think that many of the modern philosophers, like good example, I'm very sympathetic towards libertarianism and some of its analysis of power elite analysis of politics and particularly economics and these things, but it only goes so far. There's a certain nominalism to it or reductionism to that philosophy, I think, that it can't be a complete philosophy. And also a lot of them don't understand that there's a a dialectic that's being played out here, and it might have something to do with the development of Freemasonry, which is a big thing. Which no one, when you study political science and history, you never taught about the role of secret societies, which you're missing a big thing. It's a big part of it. But of course, the Illuminati sought the destruction of throne and altar, and we've seen that the destruction. Now, a lot of it is because we've been taught as Americans that kings are bad and democracy is good.
Right, kings are tyrants. It's good. It's good to overthrow kings. It's good to chop their heads off.
Yes.
And of course, anything that has to do with tradition and bogging down people's freedoms, that needs to get destroyed. So we ransack the monasteries and steal all their possessions, and we leave a cathedral or two, I guess, for sightseers, but generally it's okay to pillage them as well. Overthrow of throne and altar is really an anti-traditionalism kind of motif. Is what I think we've seen for the last 500 years. And
yeah.
And you can see how you can get there. It's just taking premises to their logical conclusion. If you're a Protestant, and that's what's happened.
Yeah, and it leads to an atomized society. The individual no longer has any institutions, be they family or extended family, community, or church, to repair to when the brutal state comes along, and they're being set up for a fall. And what do they have? All they have in common is consumerism, what they watch on TV or the iPhone they buy. And a lot of it is, again, a lot of this assault is justified in the name of liberty. And of course, that's always been the appeal, liberty, right? So you can.
Yeah, I'm growing less and less fond of that word personally. Yeah. I'm not sure that it meshes well with my historic Christian beliefs.
Yeah, and also much of many libertarians, and although I do identify with much of their critique, is what they call the free market is not the free market. It's not, whether it's Google or McDonald's or Apple or Microsoft. If you look below the surface, you'll see a lot of these telecom companies, all these big corporations have benefited from or deeply connected to the state or to the to the national security state or to the surveillance state. And I've done a few interviews with some guests who've looked into the development of the internet and Silicon Valley, and it's directly tied to the military-industrial complex. And the internet.
Let me stop you there. Okay, so that's all been good commentary. I expected to get that from you. Now, if we went back a little further, do you think the storyline would change a bit if we went back 1,000 years? Are you going to give me? You may have the same sort of trend for me, which is breaking away from throne and altar to where we have today, which is really a reign of terror in the name of democracy. But go ahead.
We live in a Masonic republic. I mean, the modern world is Masonic. We speak in Masonic terms. We've been the best form of imperialism is make sure that who you conquer internalize the commands of their oppressors, and that's what people do today. Whether it's almost like a fish not knowing that he's swimming in water. It's just there.
Do you have a theory as to why from either from the birth of Christianity or from 1000 AD or whatever that these principles of enlightenment and Renaissance, which led to humanism and secular humanism, which has led to the travesty that we have today. Do you have any ideas as to why that crept in? I have some, but I'm Eastern Orthodox. Go ahead.
No, what I've read, and a lot of my research has forced me into looking into more of these esoteric questions, because like anything, I was interested in politics and sort of the overt world of politics, party politics, partisan politics, history as I was taught, and not looking below the surface that say the real power, the gray eminence that manipulated these things.
Right.
I think what happened at some point, Masonry, Freemasonry itself, was more originally was a guild, and the idea was to keep trade secrets, And to do this, they developed methods of communicating and associating. And I think at some point, those methods, I guess that's called, it's the difference. I forget that it was either actual masonry versus speculative masonry. Operative masonry, I think is the term, versus speculative masonry.
Yeah, I don't know that,
yeah, operative masonry versus speculative masonry. Speculative masonry, I think, is when these, satanic forces or Luciferian forces, I think, these things. Of course, the Illuminati itself was he based his Adam Weishaupt. Well, he was Jesuit taught, right? From what I understand,
right?
And he applied Jesuit methods to the Illuminati, because the Jesuits were part of the Counter-Revolution, the Counter-Reformation, and so they were involved in whether in education, but also in espionage, political intrigues and these things, because what at stake here wasn't just religion. Back then, one's religion also guided one's politics, one's loyalties, and all these things.
Right.
So there was a lot at stake here, and so politics has always been. Religion has always been politicized. You could probably say Christianity was politicized when Constantine said he converted to Jesus. Right. It was the first. He was the first politician to define religion.
Right.
So it's never been. It's always been sort of It's always been a sordid affair to separate religion itself from the politicization of religion.
He wasn't so bad. He really wasn't.
So,
I was going to a brief diversion. I came across an article, I think it was yesterday, where the guy was trying to make this point that the Statue of Liberty is really not about immigrants. That the poem about "Give me your tired, your poor," all that kind of stuff was written like in the early 1900s.
Uh-huh.
But when the French gave us the Statue of Liberty in the mid 1800s or something, that all that was on there was is the Statue of Liberty holding a scroll or something that says 1776.
Uh-huh.
And then he made the assumption that what that is referring to is the great first revolution against the king, democratic revolution of the founding fathers, but it could mean something else.
yeah, like the formation of the Illuminati. Yeah.
So
May 1st, 1776. Yeah,
I'd be interested to do some research to see if there's a way to track that down.
Now the official story is the messenger was struck by lightning and knocked off a horse, which I think is a great story, and it was exposed. But then it went underground, and it used these Masonic lodges to organize and slowly, undermine, throw on an altar. Of course, one of the forces behind this was Freemasonry became a convenient tool for the Whigs in Great Britain to export instability, to destabilize the world. But at this point, it was Europe, but the Freemasonry became sort of the organizing principle of the British Empire. And there's a book by that. It's called Builders of Empires, and it all explains about.
Well, back to our larger theme. I don't know if I got you talking about, esoteric and spiritual, but do you have any more on why society began to tend towards enlightenment and masonry and all these really non-Christian things that have led us towards secularism? Do you know what the seeds of that were?
I think because I think evil people are better organizers.
Okay.
The sinister, they think in those terms. I think it all goes back to, I guess you could say, what's out of Paradise Lost? Better to rule in hell than serve in heaven.
Okay.
And that is, I think that is the guiding philosophy of sort of this multi-generational elite that have manipulated things throughout the ages. I don't know if it's...
But they weren't manipulating it like this in the 800s, 900s, 1000s,
no,
1100s, 1200s.
I think at this point, society has to develop, technologically for them to be able to do that. Like I mentioned, the big jump ahead 1,000 years and go to the late 19th century, and it really was a development of the telegraph and steamship, which enabled Great Britain to finally, or at least the elite in Great Britain, the Rhodes Circle, to start to enact their plan for reincorporation. because it was they who controlled the telegraph across the cable across the continent. They had the British Navy, and of course the steamship was at that time was of course a railroad too, rapid travel. And
so you would trace the development of certain types of technology to some of the more sinister cultural developments worldwide.
Yeah, because technology, I think during the Elizabethan era they might call it black magic,
right?
And this gets into the understanding of what science is, and some of the people I've interviewed, like Jay Dyer, have written a lot about this, about people like John Dee, the magicians.
Right.
They've always been involved in intelligence work and working with the state, and the development of things like the Royal Society, and their promotion of Newtonian physics and Royal Society science, and the suggestion there that maybe following the principles of Freemasonry, except for one understand the Royal Society was a Rosicrucian Freemasonic organization, the idea of occulted knowledge, of the occult, and if you can have secreted knowledge, whether it's financial or technological, you can always come across looking as a smart guy in the room, the genius, or the magician, right? I think it was Arthur Clarke, who said that that there's no distinction between advanced technology and magic, and so that gets to the more esoteric. But what I'm trying to do is explain this is how the esoteric influences, the exoteric, what we see,
right.
the concrete.
Let me throw my little theory out there.
Okay.
I don't know that much, but I'd point to the East and West split. And that was caused by the in large part, not only, but in large part by the addition of what's known as the filioque into the creed, which is "and the Son" in Latin. Do you know about all this?
A little bit.
Yeah.
A little bit. I know about the Great Schism. Was it 1095?
Yeah, well, 1054, I think.
1054, okay.
It was a long process, but that's one place you can objectively date it. That's when I think some Roman Catholic cardinals came down to Constantinople and threw down some papal bulls saying, "We excommunicate you." But
that's right. 1095 was the First Crusade. So
yes, that's correct. It wasn't much longer after it. And it was a couple 100-year-long process at least. But what happened was the Roman Catholics were fighting Arians, desperately trying to fight the Arians who were trying to say that Jesus Christ was not fully God himself. And so in order to fight them as best they could, they were trying to grab as much ammunition as they could. And so they wanted to change the creed from saying not just that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father, but to add that he proceeds from the Father and the Son, because they wanted to go fight the Arians with as much firepower as they could. And if they could say, well, the Holy Spirit proceeds from Jesus Christ, so he must be God. And so that's what they began doing. They began adding that to the creed. Well, the rest of the church and the Eastern Church said you can't do that. We came together as a church council in the 325 whatever it was, Council of Nicaea, and I might have been Ephesus 10 years later, Council of Ephesus, and we made it very clear that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father. He doesn't proceed from the Son. That's one of the Holy Spirit's unique qualities, is that he only proceeds from the Father, and there's a whole balance of the Trinity and that sort of thing. And so, but the Roman Catholics were so intent on fighting the Arians, the road to hell is paved by good intentions, and so they insisted, and that was one of the main things, along with the infallibility of the Pope and other things like that led to the East and West split. Well, when you somewhat declaw the Holy Spirit, if you will, in your formal paper, where there's a void, something else has to rush in and fill the void. And so that's where you're going to get your esoteric, occultic, strange things that begin to flow into Western civilization, because the mystery of the Holy Spirit had been removed. So that's something you can put in your pipe and smoke for a while and see what you think about that one. Okay, I'm going to move us on to my next topic for the evening, which is let's just talk about sources. Let's talk about alternative media, good, bad, and the ugly. But a lot of what it gets down to in life, as you know, is you have to learn to know which voices to trust. because there's a lot of very compelling voices out there. So let me start with you personally. Where do you get your information? And let's, to make it a little bit easier for this, even though you do so much broad stuff, let's just talk about more like current events, like what's going on now and in the last year and that sort of stuff. Where do you go to get your information? Because there's just a ton of lies out there.
Mm-hmm. Well, first thing is I read a lot of books, and there's no substitute for just sitting back and reading a book, putting the time in, and just because I think you get in a mental state where you can sit back, read an argument or a narrative, and the more you read, the more you can compare narratives and come to some reliable conclusion that what you're reading has some semblance of truth or is a fair interpretation of events. Because you can have the same event occur and have different interpretation, and both people can be telling the truth. It's like what was that movie Rashomon, the Japanese movie, where different perceptions of the same event and they're completely different.
Yeah, I don't know that one. That's interesting.
Yeah. But so good examples. You can be reading about World War II, and of course the British portrayal of World War II is very different than, say, a German a citizen living in Dresden.
Okay, well, I'm going to back you up because we sort of talked already about the broad view and whatever. So let's, for instance, the Orlando shooting here. Okay. Are you not, and this is okay if this is the answer for you, and I wouldn't be surprised, but are you personally not going to really spend much time thinking about that event until maybe 6 months after it and you've been able to read some more thoughtful, reflective pieces? Or are there some places you actually go on the internet or other places where you try to find out what the heck's happening here?
Well, when something like that gets reported, I'll listen to the initial reports and then wait to see if there's any inconsistencies or anomalies, which make me skeptical about the event itself. That's largely based on, I guess the past 10, 15 years, knowing that some of these shootings or events aren't exactly what they're being portrayed as in the mainstream media. But yeah, I think you can afford to sit back and wait. There's no shame in being and not knowing or not being
agnostic.
Yeah, you can be agnostic about a certain event, saying I'm not a witness to it. I didn't see it, so I'm relying on this screen and this reporter telling me this. And who knows if she's even there because they have green screen technology and they use it, And
so you don't have a couple of websites or a couple of guys you go to, like, I wonder if over here there.
Oh yeah. I mean, I do. Yeah, there's sites that have earned my trust. I think I like, from certain international things, I like Global Research out of Canada.
Right.
But then also like groups like websites like obviously Jay Dyer's site. I like to read he provides analysis, so it's not like news.
He usually comes out within a few days of providing some analysis.
And I value his analysis of it. He's earned my trust, you could say. 21st Century Wire, Packer Henderson's is another thing with analysis. I like LouRockwell.com, just reading articles there, taking things in.
Yeah, that's not so much hard reporting, but that's good stuff. I think. Yeah. I was going to add some people to that list. Go ahead, because I forgot.
Yeah. I like James Corbett.
That's what I was just going to mention, and he's not so much. He's kind of like a week or two after the fact,
Yeah, that's kind of like I said, there's no rush.
Right.
Why rush? As what was that book, Rush to Judgment, regarding the Kennedy assassination? No reason to have to rush to judge on these things.
Right.
And nor do I come out and say this incident is fake. This event is fake. Because you get the accusation that you think everything is fake. Well, no, I think some things are real and some things are fake. Judge each case on its merit, and let's look at the evidence. But the realization that some of this was going on with that was more like incidents like Sandy Hook and the Boston bomb, when things are so strange about that. But back to the sources. Another one, I guess, another good source I go to is let's see, what's another one here? What's a good aggregate source?
A couple sources that I go to, they're not necessarily 100% right. They're propaganda too, but they balance it out. I go to RT and Sputnik, and then I go to, this is an interesting one, I go to, what's it called? Press
TV.
Press TV, Iran's official spoke piece, but it's not so much. They're doing propaganda too, but you're going to get the anti-propaganda of the U.S. propaganda, and it's kind of like watching CNN and Fox, and maybe the truth is in the middle, but that's probably not the case.
Yeah,
with those two, but it's the same kind of concept. But yeah, so I get some interesting news from Press TV.
Yeah, and you have to rely on. It's a sad state of affairs when you have to rely on Iranian television, Russian television, to hope to get some, at least some clear picture of what's really going on. Because you certainly can't rely on the American media, which is completely controlled. I mean, we don't have a free press in this country.
Do you listen to? Do you read the Saker?
No, never. What's that? I'm sorry.
I highly recommend it. The Saker, TheSaker. I think it's thesaker.is. So you got to deal with all that kind of weirdness. But he's a Russian, French American. I think his parents are from Russia. I think he was raised in France, and I think and he now lives in Florida. So I think English is his third language. Brilliant guy who's got a very extensive military background, military intelligence, and he's very much leans towards Russia in his biases. He's Orthodox Christian. And so he'll talk religion once in a while, but he's mostly talking technical, military, and intelligence kind of operations. And he's got a real good sense of what's going on geopolitically. Mm-hmm. And he definitely gives you much, much better reporting of what's happening in Ukraine and Syria and the global stuff. So, highly recommended.
The Saker?
The Saker, yeah.
Saker, okay.
Yeah, you'll hear Paul Craig Roberts quotes him a lot, and Jay quotes him sometimes. He's pretty highly thought of.
And another site I like, Tragedy and Hope site. They're good.
Who
Richard
is that?
Grove. Richard Grove.
I don't know that.
He was a 9/11 whistleblower. He is very interesting. That's about 5-6 years ago. I started watching some of their productions on YouTube because I got a TV that hooked YouTube up to it. Okay. And I ran across some of these productions they were putting out. It just kind of drew me into this stuff. And it's Tragedy and Hope community. You can join the community, you pay, support them, and they produce audio-visual stuff. Another great one I think I like Brett Vanat's School Sucks Project.
What?
Stuff. The School Sucks Project.
School Sucks Projects.
Yeah.
Right. I never heard of that.
It's just about, and if you want to go at like standard education.
Oh, okay.
And he does a lot of critique and also a lot of general critiques on issues like that. He's I guess you could say he's a libertarian. And I don't necessarily agree with everything he has to say, of course. But again, great analysis.
Do you read Zero Hedge?
Yeah, it's another site I do come across. Yeah, usually very short articles.
Yeah, that's kind of my go-to site. I think that's my homepage. And it's not so much the articles; it's the comments. Do you read the comments?
Yeah, I go through. Yeah,
the comments are hysterical and very informative. A lot of good links in there.
Yeah. And a lot of good. Also, I refer to the work of Jan Irvin, who unfortunately has been kind of a rift between a lot of these researchers. But his work, especially regarding some of like the development, the manufacturing, the deadhead, the manipulation or the creation of the counterculture, his research regarding Time Life magazine, their promotion of psychedelic drugs, and how they kind of the Time Life empire, of course, links to the CIA and their promotion of the whole counterculture of the '60s, and some of the work there is good. Joe Atwell, some of the work he's done. I know he's written a controversial book regarding Jesus Christ and Caesar's Messiah. But nevertheless, it's some of his research, and also he's willing to come on my show a lot and talk to me. So whenever someone's willing to talk to me,
there you go,
talk about their work, I develop a fondness for them.
A couple other good ones, and we'll get to some of the sketchy ones. Paul Craig Roberts quotes Clearinghouse a lot. Are you familiar with that one?
No, not clear. No, none.
I might not have the name exactly right, but an Information Clearinghouse, I think it's called. of course, William Engdahl, you've interviewed him once or twice.
Of course,
his site, his articles are very, very good, and he's a little more reflective. Voltaire Net.
I've come from time to time.
.org. Pepe Escobar is a kind of a celebrity now. You know him?
Yeah, he's he's a pipeline stand and all that.
If
you want to get into
personality, not celebrity, but he's on RT a lot.
Yeah, the global politics of the geopolitics of energy and Russia and all that. He's very good about that.
All right, let's talk about some controversial ones. What do you think about Brother Nathaniel? Are you familiar with him?
Yeah, he's the guy who I watch his videos, and he's again one of these things where he guess he favors the East, you could say, and
for those people who don't know, his site is called Real Jew News.
Yes,
he's a Jewish guy. He's very outspoken against the Jews.
He's a self-hating Jew, I guess.
He wears a Orthodox monk's outfit, and I think I was looking at his outfit the other day, and I think it may be actually an archbishop's hat. So
yeah,
and I think I've seen some official Orthodox Church sort of statements, kind of to say be wary of him. And he's pretty hard hitting in his polemicist rhetoric against a lot of Judaism and Zionism. However, he's got some really good content, and he really articulates a lot of things that need to be articulated, and he does it very, very, very well.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to work with him.
And you don't know. I mean, there's again when you talk about cognitive infiltration, and is this an op? Is he a plant to?
That's interesting. Yeah.
You never know because I don't know him from Adam, right? I mean, it's like that's what the problem in this community is. You don't know people.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point. I don't think he is, but who knows? But let's go on to the next one. Alex Jones.
Well, Alex Jones is kind of like everyone's first time they stepped into this
entryway into alternative universe.
Yeah, most people waded into this first with Alex Jones, and I'm no different there. To this day, whenever I'm talking about this, people say, "Well, you're like Alex Jones." They're like, well, no, that's someone who doesn't know anything about.
Did you get into this through Alex Jones?
Partly. I mean, my
Jay Dyer did.
Yeah. I mean, you can't because he was such an internet presence. He did an operation down there in Texas. But because I would say the first time I saw the Building 7 video was with Alex Jones. Yeah, I guess that. And like anything, the production quality was good, and it was sometimes can be entertaining, be funny, so you watch it.
But for those of you who are listening, this is prisonplanet.com or Infowars.com. It's probably the most prominent conspiracy theory or alternative media presence, in the country.
Yeah, and people like Jay Dyer, I think, was actually on the show once or twice, and people. I mean, even like Ron Paul goes on the show, and
Donald Trump.
Donald Trump, but Alex Jones seemed to have curbed his mess because Alex Jones used to be like a 9/11 truther and the stuff. He doesn't talk about that stuff much anymore.
Does he not?
And not from what I've stopped watching, but from what that's the criticism of this one. He's just, and a lot of it, I think, a lot of the stuff he promotes, I think, is there to sell, erectile dysfunction pills or not pills. I'm sorry, juice that supposedly make a man out of you. From what rejuvenating stuff and post-apocalyptic tire or wares that was like the straw. They can convert dirty water to clean water and stuff like that. So he's selling a lot of stuff. I guess the man's got to earn a living. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. But it's one of these things where I think the operation down there is the fact that it's so large. It makes me suspicious about it.
Right.
Just the sheer size of it, he also tends to not cover certain elements to these stories, which might upset the powers that be.
Brother Nathaniel did a really good expose on Alex Jones and noted that his attorneys are the what's that Zionist family? Bromford?
Bronfman, the Canadian family?
Yeah, that family is kind
that's
of
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of his corporate shell is that group. He got some criticism for having a Jewish wife, which doesn't really necessarily say anything. But the real red flag was that he would never call out Israel for any of its issues or crimes. He would always avoid talking about Israel. There's some pretty obvious Israeli associations with 9/11, which he would never talk about. He always talked about 9/11 being an inside job, but he would never mention any of the obvious Israeli associations. And he made one statement one time that was just laughable, which is he said that Hollywood was owned by the Arabs. So all those kind of things have made a lot of people feel like he.
Everyone knows it's the Quakers.
Yeah, he's not quite on the up and up, but it doesn't necessarily mean he's completely bad. He just might get a lot of Zionist funding, and so he's kind of tells part of the truth and not all the truth.
That was like the report when that Arab owned like 12% of Fox News or something, and this was also we're supposed to get all excited about that.
Yeah,
and it's like, really? Or it's like 28 pages. It's about Saudi Arabia. Oh, sure, okay.
Do you follow Mark Dice?
Not really. Doesn't he do the videos?
Yeah,
and on the street videos.
Yeah, he's not really substance, but he's funny.
Yeah.
Joseph Farrell.
Very. I mean, yeah. Do I follow him? I wouldn't say I follow him. I do. I've listened to several of his talks, and I've purchased a few of his books. I've yet to read them. So his research is interesting, especially regarding the black budget and some of the loot that was carried off after World War II and the development of maybe secreted Nazi technology that was incorporated into the national security state.
Okay.
So his research is interesting. I can't say much about his was it the Death Star thesis and all that.
I don't know what that is.
Yeah, but it's getting an area that
he gets into all that space technology stuff.
Yeah,
and, interesting stuff, which is pretty fascinating. What's the name of his site?
I think it's like drfarrell.com or something. I haven't saved.
No, it's something like the other side, or on the weird side, or on the high octane speculation or something. I
thought it was like what's that Death Star that he talks about, the pyramid?
Oh yeah, that's actually what it is. It's the Visa Death Star. I can probably find it, but
yeah, it's something like that.
Yeah,
and he talks about the ancient war and all that stuff. But what got me into this stuff is about his work, like on the Nazi International and Martin Bormann and the intrigues of late 1944 and 45, how it factored into the post-war era. How the Third Reich became international and it was incorporated into the Western Western alliances with the CIA. This brings up Operation Paperclip and the Rat Line and these things.
What about veterans today? Have you done much with them? You follow Kevin Barrett?
That's Gordon Duff, right?
Well, it's changed.
Okay.
There's different people.
I listened to Kevin Barrett. He's one thing is he's a very good speaker. So his radio show is very easy to listen to.
Right.
He's one of the things. He's a convert to Islam, I believe.
Yeah,
right?
he's a card carrying Muslim.
Yeah, and a lot of what he has to say, I think, is interesting regarding 9/11. I know there are people who are very down on veterans today who call it controlled opposition. I know that for a while Jim Fetzer was associated with them, then was purged. Last time I checked, right? He was purged. His articles were pulled or something.
I wouldn't doubt that, but I've read things that are skeptical of Fetzer as well. So
yeah,
I
interviewed Fetzer last year regarding the Boston bombing.
Okay.
Stuff. So he's a very accessible guy.
I mean, I think you and I've talked about him before, and other than just a couple people speculating, I don't know there's any hardcore reason to distrust what he says. He sure throws out a whole. That's one of the things that's difficult with calling some of these people shills like Alex Jones and stuff. They throw out such good, hard hitting information that exposes so much truth, and brings hordes of people into a desire to get to the truth that it's hard to, just wave a wand and say that person's a shill. It's just hard to do.
Yeah, it's you shouldn't slander someone because you disagree with them, or even if you don't have any evidence,
Right.
You probably should be more reserved in your criticism. At least, shouldn't try to paint someone as a shill, because often these people, their living is doing this, and you're denying them their living or you can hurt their ability to earn a living if you slander them without any evidence. So
Right.
just because you disagree with them or you think they're pushing a theory that you think is too far out of left field.
Well, let's switch to the positive. We've kind of dealt with some of the strange characters. Some of the favorite people that you've interviewed. I'll tell you a couple of my favorites on your show. Of course, I'm a follower of Jay Dyer. I subscribe to his stuff and everything. I think I was probably introduced to him from your interview show. But beyond Jay, who actually I'll be interviewing for this show next week, I've become a big fan of James Perloff and
Yeah, that's who I was going to mention next.
yeah, he's that guy's what a great communicator, both in speaking and in writing. He really lays it out there.
He has a recent piece on Christian Zionism.
Oh, I read it. I was
okay. I haven't read it yet. I was going to read it.
It's the best piece I've ever seen written on it.
Cool. Yeah, because I was going to read that and see if he wants to come on and talk about it after I read it. I already downloaded and copied it and pasted it. I'm going to probably.
But he's also just recently written a couple of things on the American Revolution that you've interviewed him on, and those are fascinating pieces, and it's such good research, and all his arguments are so compelling. And then before that, he's done your standard conspiracy theory, Cold War dialectic. CFR is behind a lot of things that we're dealing with. I mean, he's a gift for us to have. Another one that you interview a lot that I'm a big fan of is Michael Jones.
Oh, you Dr. E. Michael Jones.
Yeah, he is.
He's
man,
great.
That guy has just done his research, man.
And he's a serious scholar.
Yeah, he really is.
And one thing interesting about it is some of his research. He comes from a traditional Catholic angle. Blends well with much of Jay Dyer's research and also James Perloff's research, with his writings on like Americanism and the CIA and its infiltration and I guess manipulation of the Catholic Church and all that. So there's a lot of overlap, which I find particularly interesting when you find people coming from different angles, coming to similar conclusions. Then usually at that point you can assume or think that, not assume, but come to the conclusion that there's something there. You're onto something.
A couple of interviews that you did that I passed over, and I kept saying I don't want to do that. That looks boring, and they ended up being great. One of them was the OJ interview. I think you did with Pierce Redmond. I ended up Googling a bunch of stuff, the authors he was quoting, and I ended up listening to a couple more longer podcasts by him. I couldn't believe it. I was like, this is the stupidest thing. I'm not going to sit there and listen to a podcast about OJ being innocent. That is ridiculous. And then I listened to it, and I just couldn't believe it. There are so many unanswered questions.
Yes, he did a thing with Stephen Singular, I think was the author's name of the book, about O.J. Simpson and the trial and the intrigues with Mark Furman and what was going on there. There's a lot there that people don't understand, and it's one of those things where I wasn't too concerned with O.J.'s guilt or innocence. He was acquitted, okay, but everyone thought he was guilty anyway. But if you look at the evidence, there's something much deeper going on there, and I think it looks like it was some sort of drug burn.
Yeah, and also the plausible conclusion is that OJ was deep in it, and so that's one of the reasons he couldn't just come out and just blow the whistle and tell all the truth, because he might have not actually been the murderer, but he was deep involved in some real bad stuff. And anyway, so that was a fascinating one. The other one that I kept surfing past, and I finally listened to it because I'd listened to all your other interviews, was the one about Henry Luce, the publisher of Time Life.
Oh, David Wemhoff's book. Yeah, that's another thing where
that was just a fantastic story that you just don't know it until you know it.
And that is the black op carried out against the Catholic Church through the Vatican II Council. And this is David Wemhoff he writes about Americanism and the idea that you could utilize the Catholic Church and as many offices throughout the world to spread Americanism. And this was done through the efforts of one John Courtney Murray, a liberal Catholic priest. And this gets into the issue of I think it is the Masonic infiltration of the Catholic Church, which we see like in things like P2 and the Gladio operation. I just recorded an interview with Daniela Gantzer. I haven't posted yet. He wrote a book about NATO secret armies, about what was going on in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And this outfit called P2, the Propaganda Do Lodge, this Masonic lodge in Italy, had formed a parallel government to carry out these intelligence operations to suborn the government and to do the bidding of the Central Intelligence Agency and related and interested parties. And I thought it was a great example of how, although when we talk about masonry, it can sound esoteric and weird, it's a practical way that the elite can carry out high-level malfeasance and crimes without being caught, more or less. It's just a practical way to go about doing these. Same way it was a practical way the British Empire to suborn, divide, and conquer, and establish it and maintain its empire. Nothing. You don't have to get too weird about it. It's just a strategy of divide and conquer, strategy of empire.
And the same thing with like homosexuality being at the top of a lot of elite circles. A couple of things. One, if you're homosexual, at least it used to be, that you were really, really good at keeping secrets. And telling lies and living double and triple lives. But the other thing is you were so blackmailable. And
yes, yeah.
And so there's all this homosexuality at
part of me wishes they'd go back to that.
Right.
But now I think we're entering another stage of the process.
Right.
So.
Now, is there a couple more that I didn't mention that you might want to mention that have been some of your favorite interviews or people that you?
Well, there's my inaugural interview was Dave McGowan, the late Dave McGowan, and
Weird Scenes in the Canyon.
Yeah, and also the Program to Kill. Wagon the Moon. I never interviewed him never got the opportunity to interview him about about Wagon the Moondog, about the alleged moon landings.
Right.
But I did interview him about the Program to Kill. His very disturbing book about serial killers, and
I haven't read that one yet. I need to get it.
Connections to the intelligence agencies and the role it may play. And I guess understanding that you have to read a lot of other things. A lot of people understanding the political role of organized pedophilia, child trafficking, sex trafficking, and serial killers. You have to understand the bigger picture. Of what role it may play, as whether it's a strategy of tension or an assassination program or just an experiment, a kind of a mass psychological experiment type of thing we saw with the Radio Research Project and the broadcast of War of the Worlds, is to see if you can terrify the people.
Yeah.
And get them to alter their behavior. Atomize society. It goes back to atomization of society.
So Dave McGowan was a big one on your mind.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Oh, let's see. What else? Who else have I interviewed?
I don't want to put you on the spot. So.
One of the Dr. Nancy Banks, her book about AIDS, empire, and the greed of AIDS and empire, but AIDS, diamonds, and empire, and that was one of these books that are paradigm shifting because it's such a broad. She took on such a broad topic and wrote about it masterfully. One of these underrated books that no one reads. They should, to understand really how the world works. That's if there were they'd be among us a list of top 20 books you need to read to understand how the world really works. Is Nancy Banks' book.
Well, I don't know if I've listened to that interview, so I'll go back and take a look. Now, let me ask you this: you talked about one of the first things you talked about was reading books. What is your routine? When do you find time to read books?
Early in the morning. Late at night, and
no time in between.
I get up early anyway, so that's when my time. I usually, I sleep about 5 hours a night. So
okay.
And I go to bed. I read myself to sleep, and I wake up, read a little bit, go to work, and And now it's almost like I'm reading based on who I'm interviewing.
Who was the most difficult person for you to get to interview, or you felt like that you were surprised that said yes or whatever?
Oh, let me think. Oh, surprised that they said yes. That's hard to say.
Have you had many say no?
Yeah, a few that just aren't interested. I had one cancel like a minute before the interview, which I thought was really rude, but I won't mention his name.
Okay, that's fine.
Because I thought, I actually really prepared for it. I read his book twice, and I think he went to my website and saw the fact that some titles up there, and then decided I don't want to interview.
When did you start doing this?
Late April, May 2015.
Yeah, see, I thought you'd been doing it for 3 or 4 years. When I went back and scanned your website, you've just been doing it a year and a half.
Yeah.
Are you surprised it's kind of taken off the way it has?
No, well, not really. No. It's where I thought it'd be, I think.
Is anybody else doing this kind of interview show with these kind of characters? I
run across them. I mean, everyone has their own different style.
Right. Yeah.
I wrote kind of a broad. I interview. A lot of people are shy away from some of the topics I bring up. A lot of the so-called alternative media,
right? Because
they're afraid of being, I guess, ostracized or thought of as being too wacky or something. I just think we can talk about it. My podcast, they're food for thought. So
nobody out there has as much guts as you do, is what you're trying to say.
Well, maybe they have more to lose.
Intelligence and guts combined together.
No, I just think sometimes I'm put off at the some people's derision at other people when they posit a theory of things. They call them nuts or shills the moment they say something that doesn't comport with their theory of what's going on.
Right.
They're too quick to do that. I just think, they have a point that's here. Let's hear, good. Let's hear the argument. Like a good example is the some people who decry or those who say that, the so-called no-planers, or the no-planers regarding 9/11. People who think there weren't any planes used in 9/11. There's
that whole thing. Yeah.
There's different ways you can approach that. Now, media fakery or video fakery. I was over the 4th of July weekend. I was at a family gathering, annual family gathering, and that question was brought up about fakery. And I wasn't even originally involved in the conversation. It was someone else who was talking about it, but I got involved in it somehow. But I mentioned that there is a history of fakery. So we have that as a history, whether it's whether it's the photograph of the Battle of Iwo Jima, that was staged. The baby at Shanghai bombing, that was staged. The infamous photograph of this baby crying and it's bombed out Shanghai. It turns out the baby was placed there for the purposes of the photograph. But more than that, we do have examples of things being faked, like the CNN faking the Scud missile attacks during the Gulf War. They're supposed to be in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, but really I think they're in Atlanta, Georgia, in a studio with a blue screen behind them,
right.
And that was released off the satellite feed. Other examples of fakery abound, so we can always point that. But there's a history of this stuff. But my point was that the vast majority of people who experienced 9/11 experienced through the medium of television, and that is subject to manipulation. So when you say you saw this happen, you saw it on the television set. This is being manipulated, and there is examples of what we did see, supposedly in real time, of some sort of manipulation going on. A good example is when the plane hits I forget it's the South or North Tower, but one of the towers, and the nose appears on the other side of the building. That has yet to be explained to me how that's possible. In fact, I've seen in real time the news anchor actually saying, "Look, there's the nose coming through right there." I think Peter Jennings said that, and someone said it on Fox News. "Look, there's the nose poking through." Like, what? The dynamics of the crash look odd. For example, when you see the plane interact with the building the way it is not how a 100-ton aircraft would collide with what was the 500,000-ton building. So that's strange. It's never really been explained to me. Does that mean that planes weren't there? No. All I'm really pointing out is that looks strange.
Yeah, I actually posted a video on Facebook a couple years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, that had the plane coming in and the wing. I can't do it justice. You have to see it visually, but the wing was passing through a building in the background, and it was like the wing should have been in the forefront of the building in the background,
yeah.
But instead it kind of went behind it, which suggests that it was photoshopped, or the film vision version of Photoshop, and all the tons of banter that came up on my Facebook feed from that was the question of, well, so you're saying there were that there no planes went into the building? And I said, no, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that this particular clip is photoshopped.
Yes.
That's what I'm saying. Now it could be that some planes hit the towers, but CNN didn't have as good a shot as they wanted.
Well,
so they photoshopped the whole other thing in order to have a better visual for everybody. Who knows?
And some people have pointed out, people like Jay Dyer pointed out, that the CGI was developed through the Pentagon, through DARPA. And when you watch movies and you're amazed at the special effects, and you say, "Oh, it looks so real," you don't think that technology is going to be applied for purposes of psychological warfare or propaganda? Of course, it's going to be applied for those purposes. And whether pinpointing when it is applied, that's another question. But I'm saying is that the technology exists to produce the fakery. But when you point out anomalies like that, like a plane going right through a building, which it just seems strange to me. Now, again, no one explained to me how the physics behind that, or the fact, the Pentagon, where there's this, this paucity of wreckage at the site, and you're pointing, wait a sec, this doesn't look like a plane wreck to me. Oh, it went into the building, it disintegrated. Well, that's not what happens. And then you have that very day people like Jamie McIntyre broadcasting on CNN saying, "I see no evidence of a plane ever having crashed here." And then he says, "I didn't say that," like a few years later, as if he didn't say it. But he did say it. Again, it's one of those things where I wasn't there, I didn't see it. There are witnesses that are there that said they saw it, but again, witnesses can be manufactured. They can be furnished, or they can. Remember, perception can be, there's various ways you can your perception can be wrong. You blink, you don't see something happen, and it does happen. So I don't know, but I'm just pointing. Again, these anomalies in the videotapes do cry out for an explanation, which I have yet to hear from anybody. So,
and I think the larger discussion we're having here is that there's room for listening to all these different views without immediately turning on someone and saying you're a shill.
And there's different angles you can look at. 9/11, you can look at the financial angle. Look at the connections, between the various parties, or whether it's PNAC or people, Zelikow, or or the
you can look at the Aleister Crowley angle.
Yeah, the symbology behind it, the same way the people do with the JFK assassination.
Yeah, that's interesting too. Well, let me
without insulting each other.
Yeah. So let's kind of wrap up here and let you move on to what you're doing. So my last question is going to be, why do you do what you do? What do you think you might accomplish?
Why? Well, the first thing is it gives me the opportunity to talk to very interesting people. And when I read their work over the years, and this is a culmination of years of just reading and doing research and reading their research and developing views or opinions or even questions on these events, and it gives me an opportunity to talk directly to these people and ask them questions and get their feedback and interact with them. Which I like talking to people that are smarter than I am.
So the first answer to the question is it's fun and it's interesting.
It's fun and it's interesting, and it's okay. I could also say it's a form of therapy, because when you look into these things, it can be very isolating, because most people simply don't want to look into these things. And if you don't handle it with a sense of humor, you can find yourself very isolated.
Well, there's a lot of truth to that, and
You got to keep balance in these
yeah,
things.
you do have to have a light touch on it, or it gets a little bit overwhelming.
Yeah. I mean, to this day, now I'm kind of known as the conspiracy theorist in the family.
The crazy uncle.
The crazy uncle. But the thing is, when at gatherings is I now kind of treat it lightly. But no one really on many of these matters, no one can really debate me on these things because they're simply not informed enough. So they revert to good-natured derision, and don't let it bother me because that's how people react to things they're uncomfortable with.
Sure. Yeah.
So I understand where they're coming from. What I don't respect is when you're presented with evidence, a rational argument, and you still refuse to even consider it. Because, I understand I wasn't – we all live in a state of relative ignorance, So I'm no way say, well, I know more than you, therefore, I don't take that attitude about things. We're all at certain stages in life. But I do resent when people are simply become – well, not resent it, but I no longer – I've learned I don't suffer fools well when I detect in someone a simple refusal to engage in a rational argument or to consider the evidence presented to them, especially when the question is asked of me.
Right.
I'm interrupted or something, and people don't want to talk. People don't want to talk. They just want to shout.
Yeah.
You don't want to listen to anything. And there is, when you're talking about these things, if you're coming from an angle where you don't know about these things, there comes a time when you have to say to yourself, well, I'm going to keep quiet for a while. I'm going to listen. I'm going to read before I develop an opinion on things. Because we all have a right to an opinion, but we don't have a right to an informed opinion. That has to be earned.
Yeah.
And we can't, the biggest mistake people make today is they think they can rely on institutions, whether it's the mainstream news or the college they went to or the high school they went to, and they can get some sort of packaged view of the world that's going to take a minimum amount of their time, so they can go off and attend to their jobs or take their kids to soccer practice and go on with their life. The fact of the matter is, I had someone told me one time that talking about these things, you almost have to obsess on it. And I said, well, you're right. To understand the world the way it works, you have to approach it the same way maybe a PhD candidate approaches this subject.
Or a favorite football team.
Well, that's another thing. That's a good point because a lot of people, they do have the time.
By the way, we're missing the first NFL game of the season right now. Do you know that?
Didn't even know.
Yes.
That's another thing. You start to look at things like sports entertainment as the psychological warfare weapons they are.
Yeah.
It really is.
Second part of the question, what do you hope to accomplish?
Just 1,000 points of light, if I may quote George H.W. Bush.
Yes.
Or maybe let 1,000 flowers bloom so we can be cut down. Just to get it out there. And, a good example is that technology exists now where in the past, at most I could perhaps talk to 3 or 4 people about these things because that's who all would listen to me. I can now maybe influence 3,000 or 4,000 people, maybe eventually 40,000 people, and
right.
Then they'll go all. The good example is you said you ran into Jay Dyer through my podcast,
right?
See, there you go.
Oh yeah.
And so now and someone like Jay Dyer, who who's devoted much of his life to researching these things, matters philosophical, these things. He's a thoughtful guy, thoughtful young man. I can say that because I'm older than he is.
Right.
Now I can talk to him. I've got an interview scheduled with him tomorrow night about things, and I can listen to what he has to say. I can offer a few insights and hopefully enhance his understanding of some things, and that's how it happens. I mean, you're not going to win this. We're not going to win this by being a superhero or fighting a revolution or let's form the barricades. That's you'll lose if you do that. And
so you're not for armed resistance.
Revolution is end up where you are, right? Where you began. Revolutions have always been from the top. They've never been organic or natural. And I'm for self-defense and being able to defend oneself and people being able to be armed. But as a practical matter, that's not a way that you fight what we're fighting today, which is sort of as globalist.
I like what you told me. We talked one time off the air, I guess, but you basically said the reason you do it is because you have this compulsion to tell the truth. And to be in the image of God is to tell the truth. And so, because you really, in terms of results, we'd like to say it's going to change the culture. We'd like to say that, the elites will be brought down, that this occult system that we seem to be under the power of right now will give way to truth and light. But that may not be the case anytime in the near future. We don't know. But that doesn't stop us from telling the truth as truth tellers and made in the image of God.
Yeah, and if everyone did tell the truth or didn't, be pragmatic, I'm not saying everywhere I go, I'm out there, I'm not evangelizing. I'm not going out and making everyone feel uncomfortable at a party because I'm talking about 9/11, or here's a problem with the Holocaust narrative, or, So, I at times I do, I do self-censor, although some people may dispute that. I do.
Right.
So you have to be a little bit politic with it, and the times are appropriate. I certainly don't burden my children with some of the details, some of the seedy details of, the elite and what's going on in the world, because you don't want to deny them their childhood by showing them the way the world really is. These things you can gradually introduce them to. A good example is I had I told you we homeschool our children, and my son, one of my sons was having to read. This was a reading comprehension regarding history. And there was a chapter on the World War II memorial that was built in the 90s here, close by here in Washington, D.C. And the question, after he read the essay, one of the questions was, why was the World War II memorial built? And his answer was to trick people into joining the Army.
Very good.
And I looked at it, I was reading it, and says, well, technically, that's not right, because you have to. It's reading. I want you to write what did they say in the article. It says to commemorate those who died during World War II. Okay, that's the correct answer. But you are correct. Yes, that's why they build memorials. And so these are the things. I'm not haranguing my children with Kara Quigley or 9/11 Truth all the time. But like anything, things are said around the dinner table, around that room, and these things are explained to them. So it trickles down to them, in an appropriate way.
Right. How can people find your website?
Oh, just to Google Our Interesting Times. It's a Podomatic, or a YouTube page, T.H. Kelly 67. And usually if you just do Our Interesting Times, or you'll run into it on YouTube. So.
Gotcha. And excuse me, you've got a button or two on there where people can donate. You don't get paid for this. You probably shoulder a few expenses, so people should consider giving a gift to this work. Is it a non-profit venture?
Yes, it's very non-profit all the time. My wife would tell me that. Yes,
yes.
She says time's worth something. I'm very thankful for the donations that do come in. They've made it a lot easier. Because I not only do I need support for the podcast because of storage capacity, because the level of the shows that I store over there, but I also support other podcasts, other shows.
Yeah,
I do that too, because that's how I give it.
How many do you support? If you don't mind saying.
Oh, let me see. About 6 or 7.
I think that's great. Yeah, I think I'm only supporting a couple right now, and I'd really like to up that up, because I think what if 1% of the country, instead of spending $100 a month on cable, supported 10 podcasts, man. Yeah,
that's what I always say. It's like often when when I interview some of these people like Jay Dyer, I go, instead of paying $85, $100, $120 for cable, just cut off your cable and support 6 or 7 podcasts. It's only a few bucks a month, and this crowdfunding system is a great way to do it. And I'm very thankful for those that do donate. It does make it easier. Again, a lot of this is the shows that I do is built on the better part of 20 years of reading, research, observing. I'm glad I wasn't talking 10 years ago and recording it, because my views have changed significantly. My values haven't. My views have changed.
Yeah, that's scary.
So thank you. My view is you probably shouldn't.
Scary for me. I'm thinking, oh no, what will I be believing 10 years from now? Well, listen, it's been a great interview. I knew I would enjoy this, and I really appreciate you bouncing back and forth some ideas with me. Love what you're doing. I'm glad we had a chance to talk about your work, and I will be avidly listening to your shows as I have been in the past, and really appreciate what you've been doing out there.
Well, good luck with your podcast. I caught your first one with Hugh Turley.
Yes, that's correct.
Very interesting. I read your book regarding Vince Foster, and it was very interesting. Very interesting insights on his part regarding that.
Well, I appreciate that. That was a fun book to write. I think it exposes a lot of the FBI shenanigans that are still with us in a lot of current events today. Hugh Turley is a real interesting guy. I mean, he's been on that thing. That one particular event, he studied it every which way you possibly could for 30 years. He's very passionate about it, and he's got a lot of good insights. And so I was glad to be able to do it. So I'm glad you listened to it. Glad you enjoyed it. Have a great night, and I'll be watching listening to Our Interesting Times faithfully. Encourage everybody out there to do so. And from there, let's just say good night.
Thank you. Good night.
See you.